Hello, my name is Jacqueline, and I'm about to inform you as what's called the Blitzkrieg. The Blitzkrieg, German for lightning war, is an attacking method of war used by the attacking force which is led by a defense concentration of armored and mechanized infantry formations and heavily backed up by air forces, which forces a breakthrough in the enemy's defenses through a series of short, fast, and powerful attacks. Once in their land, they proceed to spread them, using speed and surprise, and then encircle them. This method is usually used to affect the victim's way of responding effectively by continuously changing fronts and becoming the victor through a decisive battle destruction. On August 31st, 1939, German forces are getting their final preparations for the invasion of Poland. Air crews studied their targets and tanks moved to their assault positions. Then in the early hours of September 1st, 1939, Germans dressed in polished uniform attacked a radio station on their side of the border, leaving some dead German troops. This aggression was then used by Hitler to justify his attack on Poland. Then at 8 o'clock, Germans pushed aside the Polish border and raced forward. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war, but it was too late. Poland was outnumbered and facing a new kind of warfare. Let's read. In 1939, the German army consisted of 1.5 million men marched on. Its leading force were the Panzer tanks consisting of 6 armored divisions and 4 light divisions. These were designed to break through enemy's defense and attack communications, leaving everything else to the infantry behind them to handle. The new German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, were made to provide support to the forces in the front lines, the most feared being the Stuka dive bomber, being able to accurately pinpoint attacks on enemy's forces. What made it harder for Poland was also they were surrounded on 3 sides, making it essential for the Germans. The first job for the Panzer tanks were to make a breakthrough in Polish defensive lines. But to actually win the war depended on other forces' movements to crush the enemy. These attacks would come from North Germany and East Prussia. Meanwhile, other forces coming from the south would invade as well. The aim was for the forces to meet at Warsaw and Brest-Litovsk. From the start, it went well for Germany. The Polish air forces was completely eliminated in the first 2 days. The panzers cut through and struck hard on the Polish defense lines. By September the 8th, 2 German forces were able to meet at Warsaw. Then on September the 17th, the other 2 German forces met at Brest-Litovsk. Meanwhile, Soviet forces moved into Poland in spite of the agreement of the Nazi-Soviet Pact. The Polish army was now in full retreat, its government fleeing abroad. Warsaw, however, fought on its defenders, rejecting the offer of surrender. So the fury of the German war machines was faced against them, with the Luftwaffe Air Force planes and Stuka planes dealing damage. Despite all odds, on September the 27th, Warsaw surrendered. On the next day, the victors carved Poland up, following the Nazi-Soviet Pact. Both regimes gathered up anyone who posted a threat, many of them which were murdered. They sent special SS troops to root up Jews, many of them which were forced into ghettos in the cities, where they would starve to death, while others were executed on the spot. However, this wasn't the end of the Polish army. Over 50,000 troops escaped and were able to help with the front lines valiantly, also helping the Brits make shelter for the civilians. Fearing aides would carry gas civilians were given masks. Britain was preparing in case. Meanwhile, Hitler was able to get followers in Poland in under 4 weeks, so he ordered his generals to attack Britain and France in November 1939, less than 2 months after the fall of Poland, but the forces faced many problems. Reluctantly, Hitler agreed to attack the following spring. Meanwhile, his enemies were also learning lessons. Britain learned that bombing would be a key point in battle, so they decided to bomb German shipping. 7 of the 30 bombers were shot down. In some, though, half the aircraft was shot down, so they decided to switch to night raids. Soon through, they decided to target another area, the sea. Meanwhile, the Germans were planning some U-boat construction. While on some U-boats, some Germans destroyed the Idnia without warning that it wasn't a merchant cruiser. In the sea, the British dwarfed the Germans, having 12 battleships while they had none, and they had 5 aircraft carriers while Germans again had none. Although its size, the Brits had few escort vessels. That meant merchant ships went along, and by the end of 1939, 100 went down. But the Brits underestimated the German submarine power, and the British battleship courageously was sunk. Then the British battleship Royal Oak was sunk. Meanwhile, a small fleet intercepted a British convoy and sank its escort. When the war started between British and Germany, the Brits noticed they lost a lot of ships to German mines. Later, in the winter of 1940, the war was quiet, since they only tried to keep warm since it was really cold. In the spring, the British Expedition Force took up an expedition to the western front of the Belgian border, but it was dwarfed by its French ally. France had some 100 divisions along the Belgian. This unbalance made it so they followed the French general's orders, and the east were entirely defenseless. The French had fortifications from Switzerland to Belgium along the French-German border. The defense line was considered almost impossible, but otherwise the Allies had no clues how to beat Germany. On May the 10th, 1940, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister, but he chose the worst day. Germany decided to start its Blitzkrieg against France and Britain. On dawn, German troops parachuted into Holland to seize its airfields. Simultaneously, French defenses were destroyed. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe destroyed Dutch and Belgian air bases. Then the frontier barriers were pushed aside. As planned, the French and the British troops moved to a new defensive line, but none of the Allied leaders did not notice the tanks flanking them. Meanwhile, the German infantry pushed rapidly through the Holland. On May the 14th, the Germans offered the surrender of the port of Rotterdam, but the German bombers never got the message and devastated Rotterdam. On May 19th, the Germans took over Carenone. In the 20th, they took over Amiens. In 9 of the 20th, Abbeville was taken by the Germans, and in midnight, Noyelles was reached and split by the Allied front in two. On May the 21st, 2 British armored battalions prepared to attack the Germans, being even more unable to handle fast-moving tanks. The Germans had little repulsing to do. They trapped the British and seized them. On May 26, the panzers decided to attack, but weather changed, giving the Allies enough time to prepare. Then a general was given the right to do operation dynamo and evacuate the British Expedition Force. But the port was attacked, making it unable to evacuate them. The many shallow ships came to save them and take them to safety. The British were always attacked and sent some British aircraft to drive off the Luftwaffe. Although 7 British ships were sunk, a quarter of the 665 boats never got home, but still 300,000 men were saved, 41% being French. Even so, the British Army lost most of its heavy weapons, but still the French had to fight on. Although outnumbered, in 4 in the morning of June the 5th, the Germans began to destroy the last parts of France. At first, the French resistance was fierce, but then the Luftwaffe helped crush the defenses. Soon the panzers pushed south. By the 9th the tanks passed with the infantry right behind them. On the 14th the Germans took over Paris and raised the swastika on the Eiffel Tower. While onlookers stood in shock, it was only time the Germans attacked the Maginot Line, which was left isolated after a heavy bombardment. The French troops only showed a token of resistance before giving up.